It's absolutely a fair statement. And when people, there is statistics. For example, Lindsay has 70% of companies fail at digital transformation initiatives. And the major reason, I think, they look at it as a technology transformation and not business transformation.
This is the ERP Organizational Change Journal podcast, brought to you by Nestle & Associates, a Newport Beach, California-based ERP organizational change management firm serving the private equity industry. The ERP OCJ seeks to share expertise, insight, experience, and research, and to create effective conversation to help guide ERP organizational change to real, measurable, and verified success. And now, here's your ERP expert and host, the founder of Nestle & Associates, Dr. Jack Nestle.
Hello everyone, Jack here. Welcome back to another episode where we dive deep into the intricacies of enterprise resource planning, organizational change, and mergers and acquisitions in the private equity landscape. I'm your host, Jack, and today we're tackling the topic of data and digital transformations, helping CEOs create maximum value from their data and digital assets. The ever-evolving digital age has ushered in an unprecedented influx of data. Utilizing this data effectively is paramount, especially for creating value in the context of private equity firms and their stakeholders. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Julia Bardmesser. Julia, the founder of Data for Real, brings with her a wealth of experience from her time at renowned institutions such as Citi, Freddie Mac, and Voya Financial. A strong advocate for the power of data and technologies, she's contributed significantly to the fields of data, AI, and digital strategy. Joining us from New York, Julia, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jack. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise, really looking forward to sharing your insight with our listeners. Julia, before we get started, can you tell us more about yourself? Just a quick intro for our listeners.
Of course. So I have many years of experience in technology, data, and organizational change in mostly financial companies. I started many years ago in then not well-known company called Bloomberg, and I was a developer. It became much more well-known after I left it. And then my career developed. And as I look back, one of the things that became a theme of my career is how do technology, data, analytics tools and capability bring value to the companies. The value ranges from my work at FINRA, which in reduction of systemic risk in our economy, to very similar to Citi and Deutsche Bank, large banks too big to fail, making sure that the way data is managed reduces the risk of those companies, and going to Voya Financial, where data and technology and digital capabilities, analytics capabilities in achieving business value and growth of the companies. So that has been my focus and the pattern across all the work that I have done.
Well, great. Thank you for sharing that, Julie. I appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you today so we can share out some of that great experience and insight. Given your extensive experience in digital strategy, AI, data management, and combined with your practical approach to business strategy and leadership, I'm certain our listeners are undoubtedly in for a treat today. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Listeners, all of us here at the ERP OCJ hope you find this podcast useful as we share lessons learned, discover best practices, and explore the human element components of ERP organizational change. Please stay with us till the end. Julia will give us her actionable golden nugget of advice based on today's conversation, and I will recap today's key discoveries and offer my suggestions on how to implement what we've learned today with Julia. Our conversations here on the ERP OCJ are built around the listen and learn approach, but it's when you apply what you've learned that you begin to move the needle forward. So let's dive in. So, Julia, I would like to ask you a few questions more around, I think, the genesis of data strategy and digital transformations. And my first question would be, can you share with our listeners what drew you to the world of digital strategy and data management? I think you briefly alluded to it during your intro, but can you elaborate a little bit further?
So it was more actually of an accident than anything else. When I started at Bloomberg, I was assigned to a mortgage team, and there were two new people, and one of us was randomly assigned in doing more UX work, and I was randomly, user experience, basically building Bloomberg screens, and I was assigned into something I would call now data integrity work. And that was accidental, but that's what happened. So I did a little bit of work there. And then when I moved into management, that happened second time. After a few jobs, I moved on to Bear Stearns. Then eventually I was at Freddie Mac, and I decided that I want to manage teams. And again, there were two teams. I applied for a position of a manager. One team was to support front office application for a trading floor. And, that's the one I wanted because, front office applications, trading floor, a lot of visibility from the business. And the second one was managing data, reference data from different, like external reference and market data. Mm-hmm. I didn't get the first job. I did get the second. And then I realized I'm actually very good at this. So from then on, and the reason I think the difference that I brought even back then was how to make it useful across multiple purposes within the company. So my regional team was supposed to work just for one of the trading floors, and the way we've created the assets, they were used across the entire company. As Freddie Mac went through so many changes, everything we've built was used from trading floor to office of economists to auditors and to outside auditors, which at some point Freddie Mac had a lot of. Sure. So that's how I ended up with data. It's like was happy accident, ended up being good.
Well, good job working through the sirens in the background without distraction.
Living in Manhattan, that's what happens.
Yeah, right. Well, Julia, how have you seen the role of data evolve in the enterprise space, especially considering your time at leading organizations?
So what I have seen, so let me start with Freddie Mac. So one of the reasons I wanted to have the front office job is because when I did get the data job, somebody on the business side and trading floor told me that I don't really envy you. The only time you get noticed when things break, you're like telephone. So that was then. And then, of course, things broke really badly, which is Lehman Brothers and financial crisis of 2008. And the regulators came in full force and said, well, we need to understand the exposure and risks of large financial institutions. And, again, if you from outside asking for exposure might be considered that's the difficult part. But the difficult part is figuring out what the Lehman Brothers means within the context of your company. Yeah. And companies very quickly realized that, and that was the birth of data governance and data management as a discipline. And that was the beginning of that evolution. So that was both business evolution, especially in the financial services, but then there was a technology evolution happening at the same time that had the advent of big data and a growth of analytical tools that allowed you bigger and bigger use of this data. So companies having invested so much in regulatory compliance turned around and said, well, we want to use that for the business purposes as well, and we have technologies to do it. So you went from data not being even part of the conversations to pretty much every executive nowadays saying, well, data is really important to the growth of my company, or data, or now AI, which is that way it gets actually very interesting.
Yeah, interesting, Julia. And speaking of AI, considering your experience in artificial intelligence, how does AI intersect with data and driving digital transformation? What would you say to that?
So AI is very interesting. So on one hand, we've been with machine learning analytics, AI, for a really long time. This is not new this year. What's new this year is that we have a generative AI tool that's available to consumers. So the visibility just blew up. But some of those capabilities, not generative, but analytical AI, existed before. And I always looked at it as one of the capabilities business has to get data, to get value out of data. So to provide insights, to provide predictions, to create efficiencies within the business. One of the wonderful things about AI and machine learning, like as one of the techniques behind it, is that it can also accelerate making the data more useful for providing of the insights and getting the business value out of it. And that's the intersection of AI and digital transformation, because again, my definition of digital transformation, which may be a little bit, there is a lot of confusion. I don't know, Jack, if you came across that people are really confused when you say, what do you mean by digital transformation? You kind of have a range of possible responses.
Yeah, I agree, Julie. I think people tend to define that in different ways, for sure. And sometimes you hear, for instance, ERP implementations considered to be digital transformations. And I assume to a certain degree they are. But yeah, but like a ERP implementation and a digital transformation aren't the same thing technically. But it's interesting, especially throughout our podcast here, and we talk a lot about digital transformation. And I do like to ask our guests to tell us how they define digital transformation, because it's interesting, because there certainly seems to be variance in what that means exactly.
Yeah, so I do have a definition as well, and it's it's somebody who comes from data background, and ERP is part of, like, I do agree, ERP is part of digital transformation. So my definition is end-to-end, straight-through processing of every single interaction and transaction across the company. So it's getting all possible data up front. It's processing that data automatically. It's being able to connect and curate that data for every single use within the company, from operational use of operating whatever product, to financial reporting, to analytics, to ERP. So ERP is part of it, because ERP does do automation and straight-through processing for that function. It's a lot broader than that. Yeah. The reason this definition is a little different, because what you get for a lot of people's mind, digital transformation means we're going to build a website or we're going to build an app.
Yeah.
But then we're going to have a lot of manual work behind the website and behind the app, and we're still going to have a really well-staffed and expensive call center, because we're not processing everything we get within the company digitally. We have a lot of manuals. So that's digital transformation to me. Again, very important. End-to-end, all of the experiences, external, internal customers, and all of the reporting and insight.
That's a great...
Does that make sense to you, Jack?
Yeah, that's a great definition. I really like that. You know, I think you're looking at it very holistically in terms of not just the technology, but the people and the processes to support that digital transformation as well. Is that a fair statement?
It's absolutely a fair statement. And that's, I think, one of the things that when people, there is statistics. For example, McKinsey has 70% of companies fail at digital transformation initiatives.
Yeah.
And the major reason, I think, they look at it as a technology transformation and not business transformation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Julia, let me ask you, what challenges do CEOs often face when trying to derive value from their data and digital assets? And maybe a second part of that would be, especially in the context of a merger or acquisition, which adds a whole nother layer on top of useful information, right? But what's your thoughts there? What challenges do CEOs often face when trying to derive value?
Well, there are many, and it depends where the company is in terms of their maturity of how they handle data and just their assets. So one of the major challenges, though, is what we've talked about, that a lot of data and technology, it's considered to be technology work. It's considered to be something that's driven by CIOs, and somehow magically it's going to transform the company kind of from the back front. It's not being seen as a clear alignment of digital transformation initiative with the business goal. So recently I had a conversation with CEO of the company, and they've done a whole work of creating an AI strategy. And they've looked at AI strategy, and they came up with, okay, the first things we need to do is, to improve our data processing, to do or automate and standardize our business processes, and then we can do the rest of it. But one of the things that came out in that conversation, that CEO has in mind the goal of doubling their revenues in 5 years. Mm-hmm. But the strategy they came up with, so the approach is not aligned to that goal. So you have a breakdown between technology capability and business strategy. And I think that's the major thing, because CEOs or business leadership has in mind, here is our goal. This is what I'm driving to. And then there is all the stuff that's happening with data and technology, but there is no connective tissue in the middle, how specifically these things drive. And though it's very easy to go and develop something that has nothing to do with the strategy, I mean, it might be a good thing to do, but it doesn't drive the strategy.
That's interesting. That's great insight. Well, let me ask you this then. So when thinking about a business strategy, as you just referred to, Julia, How does data become the backbone for decision-making processes, right? I mean, is that something that has to be considered? That's a gap that needs to be bridged, right? When you go through a digital transformation and you create your strategy, I think that's a major conversation of a part of that exercise, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's not just having data. So the first piece, you need to collect all possible data that you can legally collect, or ethically and legally collect. But the second piece, data has to be in a usable format. So this is
Yeah.
where data management capabilities come in, and that's actually what digital transformation is. It's making the data that you have usable for driving your business goals.
Mhm.
This is actually very explicitly seen when you're looking at buying mergers and acquisitions and creating value from the companies that you buy, because a lot of value resides in the data. But if the data is either not present, or even if it's present, it's not available for use, it's very difficult to integrate with the existing, for the buyer's company systems or insights, and you have to spend a lot of money in trying to get that data usable, you basically lose on the value that you've been trying to achieve out of doing that acquisition. Or
Mhm.
you have to invest a lot more, so it erodes the value.
Those are great points. And you spoke of mergers and acquisitions, but I also know that you've worked with and advised several startups.
Mm-hmm.
How should emerging businesses approach their data strategies to gain a competitive advantage? What would you say about that?
Oh, where do I start? This is one of the pain. Well, as an advisor, and what I see of startups, and when I talk to the CEOs of startups that are a little bit more mature as well, when you build from the beginning. So when you come into a company like Citibank or Deutsche Bank or where, so companies that are mature, grown companies, a lot of them grew by acquisition, and they have a
Yeah.
huge legacy environment. And I'm sure, Jack, you see it as well when you do ERP implementation. There is a huge, so they have a lot of trouble and they have to spend a lot of money getting that data usable. So it's usually a huge
Yeah.
initiative. It's hard to tie to business value immediately. It's expense, but the CEOs always feel like, yeah, I have all this data, but I can't really make it useful. How do I get value out of it? So then you have a startup, and startup is trying to compete with the mature established company in the space. And they're just starting, they're building this. So you would think that every single CEO or CTO of a startup would pay attention of how they do deal with data, so they actually have that advantage that they can build that resiliency and scalability in how they build their technology and business environment around data, but they don't, because most of the, I mean, there's some that do, but majority, unfortunately, they don't, because data is considered to be a difficult thing to do that's going to delay, and they push very hard to get something, a product out that will generate revenues, which is very reasonable. One of the things, when I advise the companies, and I have done it for the companies that I do advise, that I'm on the boards of, it actually doesn't take more time or more money to put the right data, the beginnings of the right data management right up front once as you develop MVP. It's actually, so I've done it in kind of in real life, working with technology teams of a startup. It doesn't delay the release. It doesn't cost more money. If anything, it actually makes follow-up development and development of the features better. Unfortunately, this is not like, there's still a lot of companies that kind of just say, okay, we'll do it later. We'll do it later. Once we get revenue going, we'll have money, we'll do it later. Well, that later never really arrives, or arrives so late in the game that now it's really big and expensive proposition, and there needs to be huge amounts of attention and again funding and time to be devoted to now fixing the data environment.
Yeah. That's right. You do the right things on the front end, and it makes the whole process more effective and efficient. You remove some of the challenges and risk later downstream, right? If you do the right things on the front end.
Absolutely. And you set yourself up to scale to more than one type of customer and to more than one product. Because a lot of startups, they start with one product.
Yeah.
So they all, like, as an example, a very practical example, all of their setup assumes only one product because that's their MVP. It's only one product. But presumably, if they want to scale, they want to offer more than one product. And then it's either really messy, or they create a whole new infrastructure and then they have problem accounting for it, or they have to go back and re-engineer the original MVP, which is full of risk as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Julie, I know you look at and define, as we've discussed earlier in this conversation, digital transformation and strategy holistically. So how do leadership dynamics play a role in shaping and executing a successful digital strategy?
So one of the things that's really important to me is that digital transformation is a business strategy. It's not a technology strategy. So business owner, business beyond sponsorship, it's a business strategy that has a business outcome that drives the business goal of the company. And then you align the technology initiatives, data technology, analytics, AI to that strategy, but it's a business that owns that. And then obviously it's a partnership relationship with the CIO, with CDO, whatever the title is, chief analytics officer, to get that strategy executed. But again, the main piece is digital transformation is a business strategy. It's not a technology strategy.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jack? Again, in your experience, is that something that you see as a success factor as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that, technology is, it's there to support the people and the processes. And we talk a lot on our podcast and internally at M&A, what we call the triad, right? The people, processes, and technology. And I know, you hear that, right? And it tends to be a cliche, but when it comes to digital transformation and ERP implementation, it goes way beyond, success goes way beyond the technology or the functional capability of the application, right?
Yeah.
And to make it work. So they all have to support each other. It's a bit of a triangle or a triad. Yeah, I would say that leadership and organizational culture and the people is a huge aspect of a successful strategy. There's no doubts about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the definitions I have of data capability. It's not just technology, it's first and foremost, it's organizational people capability.
Yeah.
And then you have technology piece of that. By the way, that triangle that you're talking about, one of the things, the one I saw iteration on it recently that I really liked, that had a circle within that triangle that said data. And it touched every line of the triangle. So you had kind of all of that arranged around data capabilities.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot, as you can guess. I love that.
Yeah, and the other thing, that triad, and of course the circle in the middle with the data, each one of those has an impact on the other variables, right? It's kind of an equation where people, process, technology, data equals success. And if any one of those variables change or doesn't exist at all, that has a huge outcome on the output of that equation. No doubt about it. Julie, I know when we spoke over the phone several days ago, we talked briefly about the future of data. And so I want to share with our listeners some questions I have around the future of data and digital transformations and mergers and acquisitions specifically.
Mm-hmm.
But given your vast experience, where do you see the future of data-driven digital transformations heading? Can you pull out your crystal ball, and what do you have to say about the future of data-driven digital transformations in general?
So I think one of the things that's happened now with AI, with ChatGPT and generative AI, and that bringing even more focus around data and use of the data for the business growth, it's going to change the way. So one of my hopes, I don't know, hopefully it's a crystal ball, but that it will also bring back the necessity of making your data usable and being able to drive the transformation. So it's going to go from everybody acknowledging the data is important, but in conversation around AI, it's really conversation about ability to use data for growth. So it will kick that to the next level. The other one is AI brings enormous amount of potential, but there is also an enormous amount of risk. The power of AI, as we see, and we're just in the beginning, is enormous.
Yeah.
I've seen, that famous phrase that, one of the people who said it was Churchill, is with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
a lot of that responsibility relies on what data do you use to train AI. And there's so many concerns around that, around ethical concerns and accuracy concerns. So it actually kicks data management into a much more much more important, but also adds more complexity. But it also brings tools to manage that complexity. So I'm very optimistic about where we're going with this. I think, but we all have to also keep in mind that responsibility portion that comes with that great power, and not misuse it and not unleash something on the world that we can't really put back in.
Yeah. And that's a fascinating topic, right? Is governance and control. And it's
Yeah.
pretty exciting on one hand. On the other hand, it creates a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah.
But to your point, as you said, on the whole AI front, we're just in our infancy. And it's going to be quite the roller coaster, I think, going forward here to see how things play out.
Yeah, that's, there is a whole, when you have kids, there is a whole conversation about nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
Like what plays more in creating a character of a person. And there are tons of like philosophical and otherwise arguments about that. But AI, it's all about nurture. AI grows on the data we produce. So to certain degree, is that going to be the face that's staring back at us, because it's going to grow on what we as humanity nurtured.
Yeah.
So that's going to be like, that's more of kind of less practical, more philosophical conversation.
Yeah.
But again, goes back to need to make sure that what we use is a good thing to use.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, as you know as well as I do, with respect to mergers and acquisitions in the private equity sector, typically during a merger and acquisition, there's disparate systems, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's different databases and different systems and different ERP systems, and and it's definitely a time of trying to figure out how to consolidate all that data, as you speak of, the circle in the middle of the triad, the people, processes, and technology. So how, and you've alluded to this throughout our conversation today, but I want to just ask this question again, maybe in a little bit different way, but how crucial is it for firms to have a robust data strategy, especially in the context of mergers and acquisitions?
I think, well, not surprisingly, I think it's crucial. I think throughout the whole process, first, when identifying the target for the acquisition, it's important to consider what is your current state in terms of how you use data, your data capabilities. Are you prepared to take on the whole new company and integrate it? Are you prepared do you need additional capabilities in that space? Should you focus on companies that bring something to the table? So at the very least, it starts with a really good evaluation of what you have currently and where do you want to go in terms of making data useful for the business purposes of the company. So you identified the goal of the acquisition, but then you need to look at what kind of data and data capabilities you need to meet that goal. So that's even before you start. And then as you have identified the target, it's really important in the due diligence process to look at the target and see what do they bring to the table. What is the state of their own data capabilities, data strategy, usability of their data? What is the state of their talent in terms of the resources, in terms of the leadership? What are their business processes around managing the data? Are they how much manual processing do they do? Is the data available, usable? And it's really important to do it in the due diligence, because to assess and to figure out how much, whether to buy, and B, even if you decide to buy, what should be an appropriate price and how much money you should allocate to integrating, or in case of PE, derive an outsized value of this company, how much investment does that require? And that huge portion of it depends on their data and technology landscape. And it's even beyond, usually it gets looked at in terms of mergers and acquisition on synergies and being able to save money, but it's a lot more than that. It's a potential of realizing value, and either there is a potential and you should pay for it, or it's going to get you a lot of investment from you to realize that potential to get that value out. Is that something, again, that you have seen in your experience as well, that when Like you can get very unpleasantly surprised if you don't do that due diligence. And then after you bought it, I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
that's a
that,
problem.
yeah, I think that was very well said, Julia. And we see this every day, every week. And I agree. I mean, due diligence is key, right? Because, one of the things that private equity firms like to look at, especially on the pre-acquisition side, is are there any notable high risk concerns from a business information perspective that should even prevent us from moving forward with the acquisition to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that needs to be considered when you do a due diligence. And the second is okay, well, maybe not. Maybe there's no reds, what we call reds or mission critical issues
Mm-hmm.
that should actually be seriously considered before you sign on the line to purchase to go through the acquisition. But then there's the other idea that you look at is post acquisition, and that is really okay, potential versus actual current value.
Mm-hmm.
And in what would it take? So we know the current value here in terms of the business information may not be very high, but with like you said, organizational capital, time, money, and effort, there's substantial potential to really move our business information along. To take this data and create more improved business intelligence. So that's one thing that we look at frequently during our due diligence, and I think that the way you expressed that was right on.
Yeah.
And sometimes, Julia, too, I will say it depends on the private equity firm. I think that some PE firms perhaps understand that better than others. It's one thing to say, hey, yeah, there's just no major risk from a business information perspective that would prevent you from an acquisition. But what you also don't want is to have a surprise after, post acquisition where, oh, hey, surprise, it's, $3 million in significant organizational capital to get you to where you want to be. So you may not be broken, but you may not be running very well either, right?
Yeah, exactly. Jack, you're absolutely right. There is a risk portion of it. So there is cybersecurity risk, information security risk, privacy risk, regulatory risk that needs to be looked at during due diligence. But there is also risk of not realizing the value that you're trying to realize because the data management discipline is not there.
Yeah.
But then there is an upside because if you can uncover uncommonly good data and data capabilities, you can get to your value much faster and you can realize a much better return. So you want to look at it both ways. You want to look at it on both the risk and the risk of both, regulatory, like cybersecurity risk, but also risk of not realizing the value and overpaying for it. But then you don't want to miss the opportunity on the other side if the capabilities are just there that are really good that will speed you up and accelerate your ability to extract to get value out of that acquisition.
Yeah, exactly. And Julia, we've seen cases where it was presupposed, it was assumed going into a due diligence from the PE firm that the ERP system was just was garbage, right? That it wasn't the right fit. And so what we try to do is we go in and be very objective in our approach to systems assessment. And there have been times where we went in and we took a deep dive look at the functionality of the ERP system and determined that it's not the ERP system. Your cornerstone, we call it, the ERP system is okay, but you have some major disconnects and gaps with the people and the processes. So we need to focus on configuration or improve training. So there's other aspects there, so you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, right? And make the assumption that you need to spend millions on a new ERP system when in fact you just need to, you need to get all the right people around the table and just focus on, maybe it's process discipline or, maybe it's just a more thorough understanding conceptually of how a ERP system works. And so we've been in those positions before where the key that we've discovered during the due diligence during one of these transformations is not that you necessarily need to replace your digital, your technology, your functionality and your applications, but you need to focus on the bigger picture, the holistic picture, and which includes those other pieces that we've talked about throughout our conversation today.
And that's a useful thing to know before you buy the company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Julia, I know you mentioned AI, but being someone who's very interested in technology, and really, I guess more specifically, me personally in my research, not only interested in technology and where it's going, but how that will impact that triad. How does that impact that equation for success? So, what are some emerging data products or tools that leaders or organizations should be aware of in this landscape? Is there anything else that comes to mind in terms of data management, big data, anything like that you could share with our listeners?
So obviously there are tons of tools out there. So some of them, there is a new class of tools emerging that evolve both data quality and data lineage into data observability. And for AI, that's actually really important because what you get around data, you actually see the data that flows into execution of the model. And you can know, it allows you to see whether the output, like, do you have problems with the data that's flowing in, both from the side of some of the questions around AI, is it producing the right answer? You don't necessarily have visibility into the logic, but you have to have visibility into the data that went in both in training and execution. So there is a whole tool set that's emerging around data observability, and it's kind of evolution, to my mind, as I said, both of data quality and data lineage. Then there is a wonderful set of tools that's emerging around making development more efficient. One of them is code generation. So that's basically, because one of the things, the reason I stopped being a programmer, because I got tired of learning yet another details of new API or new, like, details of the syntax. But I really like the logic portion. So what AI code generation tools, I think, give you is that you focus on the logic, and AI is the one that has to learn the details of the syntax. So that's a very powerful set of tools for efficiency. The other side of it also can produce documentation. So a lot of mature companies have a lot of systems that nobody knows anymore how they work, and a lot of business rules are embedded. And it's very expensive to go and figure out all the business rules, and that's why a lot of companies don't actually touch those systems because they're not sure of everything that's inside. So having the AI-enabled tools that can generate documentation and can make that hidden logic visible is incredibly useful. And it's risk reduction and it's acceleration of the process. And then, of course, the whole kinds of tools of, generating content, so marketing content, copywriting, all of that work, and just analysis, predictive analysis. All of those tools are growing. So it's, once you have all of this data, being able to use it for accelerating the growth of your companies and pinpointing where you need to go. I think that's an amazing, again, those are amazing powers. But I don't want people to forget the first piece of it, which is actually accelerating the development and the efficiency side of the equation.
Yeah, great insight. Thanks, Julia. Well, Julia, I really appreciate your time today. This has been a fun conversation with lots of great insight. But before I let you go, and before we wrap up our conversation today, I always like to ask our guests for their golden nugget. So based on everything we've discussed today, what's the one key takeaway grounded in your knowledge and expertise that our listeners can adapt to truly help them move the needle forward in their own endeavors? What's your gold nugget?
So probably not going to come up as a surprise based on everything, on our conversation, but digital transformation is a business transformation first. It needs to start with the business ownership, and then it's a partnership with the technology and data people to bring it to fruition. But again, start with the why, start with the business goals, and align everything to that. And that will get you out of that 70% failure bucket into 30% success bucket. It's not the only thing, there is a lot more, but if you don't start there, you most likely you will end up in the 70% bucket.
Yeah, well, good stuff. Thanks, Julia. I appreciate that. So as we come to close today's episode, let's reflect on insights Julia shared with us. So from understanding the intrinsic role of data and digital transformations to the importance of a robust business strategy intertwined with AI and technical tools, we've covered a lot of ground. And if there's one thing to take away, it's the power of integrating these insights into your own operations. Remember, while our conversations are rooted in a listen and learn approach, it's the application of this knowledge that makes the real difference. So I encourage you all not just to be passive listeners, but active implementers and take advantage of some of the great insight that Julia provided for us today. As you begin to apply what you've learned from experts like Julia, that's when you truly start to move the needle forward. Thank you so much for your time today, Julia. We truly appreciate your dedication to your trade. But before we go, can you tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you?
So LinkedIn is great. I always check and respond to the messages on the LinkedIn. The other one, the name of my company is Data for Real, and I have a website, data4real.com. There is a button there to write me an email or to schedule time with me. So that's also a great way of reaching out to me. And the email, by the way, is julia@data4real.com.
Well, thank you. And we'll definitely include that information in our show notes. Thank you again, Julia. We appreciate your time. Be well, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
You likewise. You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the ERP OCJ podcast. This podcast is intended as a forum to study, share, and discuss ERP organizational change successes and challenges.